Andrew, good to see you again. You've had a busy week doing lots of podcasts and stuff, so I appreciate your time. Not talking about the share price, but talking about the business. Um, are we back? The raise on Monday was very welcome from my perspective as a shareholder. And I know it's been a difficult time for you and Jesse trying to raise capital, and the market hasn't been there for treasuries in general. And you've been tirelessly working away to do it. Is this the beginning of the next phase?
I hope so, yeah. So, we were really pleased to be able to announce the raise on Monday. 2 months maybe work, sort of if you're trying to sort of condense where these leads come from. This one particular lead is probably 2.5 weeks, start to finish. But the wider piece is probably 2 months. There are some people that we've been speaking to for longer that I think will invest when a particular milestone's met. But it just takes time, and it's quite frustrating, but completely understandable that some of these conversations take a long time. But the good thing is that if you imagine that you're, working as hard as you can, spending a lot of time going to meet people in person as well, and getting a lot of those meetings in over, let's call it a 2-month period, and then you start to see them sort of get over the line, then, it's quite good if you compare that to you weren't having all of those conversations over that period of time. So, I'm a developer at the end of the day. I'm not a salesperson, but if I was a salesperson, I'm sure I'd be used to like some sort of sales pipeline, and that's exactly what we've got. We've got an amazing sales pipeline of people that are interested in buying different things from us, predominantly equity, and yeah. So I'm I'm so busy today. For example, I've only looked at the share price 2 or 3 times, but I'm not pleased with where the share price is, and I couldn't believe today that it touched a 1 mNAV. That seems madness, but it is what it is at the end of the day. But in terms of the business, then I couldn't be happier.
Yeah, and that kind of leads to a question that I had for you around. Can you elaborate on? I mean, you've already mentioned one type of deal, but elaborate on the sort of length of time it takes to set up deals. So, whether that's an equity deal or launching a new product, a new financial product. I think it might be helpful for retail investors to kind of understand why it's not just, oh, we've got this idea, and then suddenly it's out in the open.
Yeah. So if somebody came to us right now, and they said that we want to invest in the Smarter Web company, it's very unlikely that they would sort of get in touch and within half an hour want to make an investment. There's normally they get in touch, you arrange a meeting, there might be another meeting, all that sort of stuff. So there's a period of time. So let's call it a week or 2 at best. But then also you've got the other side of things, which is the actual deal itself. So the way that we do all of our deals is we say we can't tell you the price because we'll always do our deals at the closing price. So if it was right now, the closing price at 4:30 today. So we always communicate that with people and say we'll potentially structure a deal whenever you want. But obviously it'll be at the prevailing market conditions. And then if it's something that you've done before, so you've got all the documentation, you can get it done fairly quickly. Maybe in an evening if they're, say, a regulated firm. And there's different ways of doing that because it basically depends on how you AML and KYC the source of the funds that's coming in, because that's another check that has to be done. With the one that we did the other day, for example, it was a slightly different contract because it had the warrants in there, and it was also to a US institution through a US bank, effectively. So that takes a bit longer. So we pushed our lawyers really hard on that one, but a couple of days. So then if we get someone else doing the identical deal, then it'll probably be more like an evening, because you just reuse all the paperwork, and of course it's cheaper then as well. So yeah, it takes time, but I think it's probably more the decision-making process than the actual doing the deal itself, because doing the deal itself is just an admin thing, really important admin, and you'd be surprised about how many people get involved in it. But ultimately, it's just a process. The decision-making process is the bit that's different. So, before we were a listed business, with websites, just websites, selling websites, sometimes we would get someone contact us and buy a website on the same day. Other times we'll get someone contact us and they'll buy a website 6 months later. And it's the same with investing, really. Different people make different decisions in different time periods.
Yeah, and you mentioned the big American bank. I can't remember when now. Back in July, maybe, and here we are. That's the time frame that it took to land that deal.
It does take time, and like we've spoken to multiple American banks. It's just the Maxim deal is the one that we've announced so far. But they take time, and even onboarding with a bank takes quite a long time. There's one that we're working with which is much bigger than Maxim. That might take another 2 months before we're onboarded. Maybe it'll take longer. So these things do take time. We try and do them, as best we can, but that's why you want to have loads and loads of different conversations, because if you're speaking to so many different people, then the chances are some people will be ready to do stuff sooner than other people, so you're building up that, like I say, that pipeline of people that are interested in doing things.
And what about, well, the one that we can talk about is smarter convert, right? So what sort of timeline did that take from initial thought to Toban putting in $21 million?
I'd have to check my notes on that, but it probably took maybe 4 weeks, maybe 5 weeks. I couldn't remember accurately, but the reason why that was a bit harder was, we were doing something different. That was the first Bitcoin denominated convertible bond in the UK. I think it's probably the only one still, actually. Yeah, it was a different structure, but most of the work on that wasn't the agreeing the contract with Toban, but was agreeing or it was getting the terminology right. So it was the negotiation of what then went into the contract. So yeah, some of them take longer than others. There's one thing that we're thinking of doing at the moment. And that's not actually that long away. But obviously, some things can take weeks, some things can take days, some things can take months. But we're in a good place. If you look at what we've got as a company, yes, I found it very, very tough the last couple of months. I've been doing my best to push the company forward, and I believe we are pushing the company forward. Obviously, the share price doesn't suggest that, but even someone that doesn't like us can't argue that we're not pushing the company forward. You just have to keep pushing things forward, which is exactly what we're doing. And I couldn't be happier with how the company's doing. Look at how many companies are raising capital. I was doing a bit of research on the UK Bitcoin scene earlier, and it's appalling. Like, most of the companies have hardly said anything for a month, 2 months. I think I counted 3 months. Whereas we've been good times or bad times, consistent. Yes, the Bitcoin yield in the quarter to date, once we've deployed the capital fully, that we'll announce as soon as we have to announce it. We'll using publicly available information will be, smaller but bigger than, obviously the 0.1% the other day. But at least we're moving things forward, and I think that's really important. And that was why it was also important to show that capital, because it shows and it shows to the market, i.e. the secondary market, that we're still doing things, but it also shows to other institutional investors that, come good times or bad times, we're getting on with the job and trying to push things forward. So it's what people want to see, in my opinion.
And speaking about sort of the business rather than the share price, are you able to add any colour to who is currently on the board and their roles on the board?
Yeah, sure. So I can talk about the structure that we've got. So we've got Sean, who's our non-executive chairman. So his job is to oversee the board, to make sure that the whole board is working as it should do. And then within that, you've got sort of two halves. So you've got the executive board, and there you've got the CEO, which is me, and then you've got the CFO, which is Albert. So we work very closely together, lean on each other on things. And the CFO is obviously an incredibly important role, and he does lots of things to push the business forward, but also to improve what we do. So being an accountant, the obvious one there is looking for cost savings, and yeah, he's quite good at that, even though we're pretty lean anyway. So that's what happens on the executive side of the board. And then you've got the non-executive side of the board. So there you've got Sean is the non-executive chairman, but then you've got Tyler, and then you've also got Randall. And what the non-executive side of the board give us is, firstly, corporate governance. That's really important as you get bigger. But then it's also different people have got different skills. So Tyler with his Bitcoin knowledge, Randall with his audit knowledge, and Sean with his wider capital markets experience. They all are people that we can message if we've got a particular question. But then when we have the board meetings, they'll all drill down to the bits that they really care about, to cover off all those sides of things. So that's the way the board works. We talk all the time. And then we have these more formal meetings, which the non-executives are basically to make sure that the executive team and therefore the rest of the business is doing what the shareholders expect us to do, really. And that's why, as we get bigger, you'll see the non-executive side of the board to be less involved in the equity side of things. Because as time goes on, we'll need more non-executive directors that haven't got an equity position in the company, because then they're truly independent. Whereas obviously coming out of being a very, very small company, it doesn't necessarily work like that. But you wouldn't want to have, your non-executive directors having a massive financial interest in the company, because that influences their independence, which is quite an important thing. But that's why people like Randall and Albert are so important, because as we grow and grow and grow into the company that I want us to be, they've got a lot of experience in how you structure those things properly. And that's important, not only because it's the right thing to do, but it's also what the regulators expect, and it's also what those bigger institutional managers expect. The only bit that, without wanting to annoy anyone here, that I don't think we'll ever go too crazy about is all the ESG stuff, because we'll do what's right from a moral and an ethical point of view, and aligns with my values, which is hopefully what the company will always align with. But we won't do all those rubbish things for the sake of things that some of these big companies do, because I think that's a complete waste of time. So we'll do everything more responsibly than a lot of these big companies, but we'll do it in our own sort of unique way.
And then, well, thank you for that. There's people out there who see leverage as a way a treasury can kind of justify its MNAV. Firstly, do you agree? And then secondly, what's your wider view on MNAV, and can it be sort of defended or justified?
Well, I think MNAV can be justified. I've got zero doubt in my mind about that, because ultimately, if you deliver compound Bitcoin, then you're giving something better than Bitcoin. So, if anyone thinks that I'm doing anything other than a crap job, then to buy Smarter Web Company for a 1 MNAV or to buy Bitcoin at the price seems like a bit of a no-brainer to me. That said, some people have got different views. There's some people, and I share this to a degree, that MNAV is simply a sentiment thing. So the more bullish the market is as a whole, not individually, the higher the MNAV should be for the better companies. But then, of course, things vary all the time. So that's one thing. The second thing is how you defend your MNAV, or do you really need to defend your MNAV? Do you just allow the market to do its job? So the way that we would look at it is we wouldn't try and beat the market in terms of, if the market wants to send our stock up or down or whatever, we go with the flow with that, because you can't fight the market. Anyone that's been investing for a very, very long time, unless you've got unlimited capital, which obviously the shorters often have got almost unlimited capital, you're onto a losing battle there. But what you can do is you can do sensible things. So, for example, if you haven't got any debt, you can take responsible debt if you can get it at the right terms, and you can use that as a fantastic way to absolutely storm out of that sort of like 1 MNAV type position. So that's quite an exciting thing to do. And then there's other things that you can do as well, which may be useful for us in the future. If you're at either a flat or even in a negative figure. So yeah, there's lots of different things that you can do, and I think that's one of the great things about being bigger and having a clean balance sheet. It allows you to do some of that stuff. I think not just with us, but with any Bitcoin treasury company, or certainly anyone that I would want to invest in, you just need to make sure that the management aren't doing things that can go wrong, under not just sort of possible scenarios, but extreme possible scenarios is probably the way to do it. So yeah, we think that with our balance sheet that that obviously allows us to get good terms as well, but we think that a fairly small amount of debt factored into that at the right time, which will obviously be communicated to the market should that happen, is quite an exciting thing, and yeah, would add quite a lot of value there. So yeah, I believe that we could actually borrow money cheaper than even Saylor can borrow money. So we just have to wait and see whether the board think it's the right thing to do for the business, and then market will then announce that to the market should that be decided. But we explore all options all of the time.
Yeah, and that kind of leads to another question that I had for you, which is, are you able to talk about like the different types of leverage that you've been looking at?
Probably not. Probably saying more than what I've said might sort of A, give the game away, and B, give some of our sort of friendly competitors more ideas than we've already given them.
Okay.
So yeah, I don't think we'd be allowed to say any more than that.
Fair enough. But following on from the previous question, what this is obviously been a challenging time for shareholders, well, with a short time horizon. some are saying that, you know, the pure play just selling equity days are over. What do you think to that?
Well, it's interesting, you know, when you've got a market, you know, you've got sellers and buyers, right? So, you know, when I look at what people say online, I don't see many posts from people saying that they've sold any shares, but, you know, people do sell shares, and that's ultimately what they're there for. And of course, they're welcome to sell shares. You know, so I think people just need to remember that a market is buyers and sellers. And, you know, clearly somebody's been selling some shares, you know, since we've been listed, you know, and that's worth remembering, you know, when everyone's sort of talking about things. I don't think that they're right, though, the people that say that, because, you know, like, strategy's been in existence for what, 5.5 years, something like that. And, you know, they have a toolkit. So they use equity, they used fiat convertibles, they've never used Bitcoin backed convertibles. They've used the ATM, of course. Now they've used preference shares within ATM. So a whole mix of different things. If you look at like the Smarter Web Company, and then you look at where the Smarter Web Company will be in the not too distant future, you know, we've got a pretty decent toolbox actually of things that all work together. And that's the key point. You have these different things, and you use them all to work together to give you, you know, the growth in the ultimately the company's balance sheet, which is, you know, what you're trying to do for then, you know, the future. So no, I don't think that they're right at all. I think if you look at like Metaplanet is a good example. They've had 4 periods of expansion and contraction. You know, I've still got some strategy shares that I bought when they traded at a discount. I can't even remember when that was now. I remember buying them, but that's about it. So yeah, no, I think it's very easy when, and you know, we're all guilty of this, that when you look intraday and then you look at a day and even a week and things, you know, things can feel very, very different. You know, so I think that's probably more, you know, dare I say it, an emotional decision. I know some of the Bitcoin treasury companies are doing things that I don't think they should be doing, which is looking at, say, preference shares when they're much smaller than us. I think that there's other ways that you can do something that's equally as beneficial to your balance sheet. You know, if you know how to do it. So yeah, I don't think like selling equity is my favorite. My favorite type of financing, providing the value in your equity is reasonable, i.e., it's basically a higher MNAV. You know, that's your currency. That's your that's the value. You know, like, selling your equity is the best thing ever if you've got a decent value to it. If you don't have a decent value to it, you should be looking at alternative things, but making sure that they're right. And what you do today will be different to what you were doing 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, you know, because you use the toolkit at different times for the benefit of the company and therefore its shareholders, you know, around what the market's allowing you to do. But no, I don't think that selling equity is dead. And we proved that this week. We proved it. We sold some equity, albeit we did give some warrants, which some people have got different views about. I think it was right. But there you go. We sold that, and then effectively we set up another chunk of money to come in with no commission, because you don't pay commission on warrants like you do when you raise money through a broker. So yeah, no, I love selling equity at the right price.
And this option that I think you also mentioned last night on your interview with Alexandra, that bridges the gap to preferreds, is that a not too distant future, very, very soon? You know, where are we on the Andrew Webley scale of time?
Well, there's multiple things that you can do to bridge that gap that we haven't announced yet. I'd be quite surprised if you didn't see one or more, you know, sort of in the near future. Probably won't put a definition on near future. Yeah, I probably won't. I don't want to get in trouble with the lawyers. You know, they're for one of our other projects, they're quite keen on telling me what I'm meant to say and not meant to say. So probably shouldn't put a formal definition on that one.
Sure. Pardon me. What do you think has been going on with the market kind of recently? Originally, I was going to ask this as a tongue-in-cheek question about SWC becoming a GBP tether stablecoin, because it's just been ranging around £1 for a little while. But then, you know, that changed today. You know, do you see this as the quiet phase before? You know, what do you think might be going on?
Do you mean in terms of, you know, like why I think the price is like it is, or do you mean like, you know, what I think is going to happen next, or? You know,
well, I was kind of assuming you weren't able to talk about what happens next, but
well, I can talk about everything as long as it's sort of within my opinion, you know.
Okay. Well, yeah. So you know, we had the big drawdown. Then it's kind of been we've leveled off seemingly until today, at least. And then yeah, so a bit about that, and then a bit about where we're going next.
Yeah, so like I must admit that I am quite surprised to see it sort of touch a 1M nav. I'll be even more surprised, you know, if it goes negative. You know, we're in a closed period at the moment, which is really annoying, which basically means the directors can't buy any shares because we're on, you know, the last couple of weeks before our results. And then I would imagine that we can't buy any shares until the results come out, but I haven't asked that question yet, which is really quite annoying. You know, it is what it is at the end of the day. It's, you know, there's some people out there that are happy to sell the shares at that price. And then there's some people that are happy to buy the shares at that price. And, you know, obviously when you get more sellers than buyers, the price goes down, and vice versa when it goes the other way. I'm quite surprised in terms of the value, because every morning I get sent by our brokers a table of the Bitcoin treasury companies. So it's got the, you know, the ones that I rate, which are like the global ones. So, you know, Metaplanet, Capital B, Strategy, and, you know, our MNAV's pretty much the cheapest there, or amongst the cheapest. And then it's got the UK ones, and I think we've probably got the lowest MNAV bar one there as well. And I think that probably just comes down to you get people speculating more on these things, whereas maybe people speculate on us a little bit less because we're that much bigger from a UK point of view. I think what we could do with is, you know, we could do with Bitcoin ripping. That would be pretty good. And like, I haven't had a look, actually. Let's have a look at what it's doing at the moment. So yeah, Bitcoin's sort of still holding 120 quite nicely. I personally think that it's looking like it's just finding that level, and then it will rip. Of course, it might not. That would be very good for our balance sheet, obviously, because we own a lot of Bitcoin. You know, approximately £250 million worth of Bitcoin. So yeah, that would be pretty fantastic for that side of things. I think that might also bring some light back into, you know, the Bitcoin treasury global sector. Clearly that's been hurt quite a lot by a lot of the fundraisings that have been done for the last sort of couple of months that have all sort of played out in the last, say, 2 months. And I believe that we're getting to the end of that as well. So I think we're at or near the bottom, and then things get better. I personally think Bitcoin's going to have a very, very good quarter. And then if I think of my opinion of Bitcoin, and then I think about what we're actually doing as a business, I'm very happy with that as well. So, I believe in one, but obviously I can't control that. I very much believe in the other, and I can control that one to a degree. And I think that you whack those two things together, and well, it couldn't be any better than that, if my beliefs are true. So yeah, it's it's not much fun, like when things are sort of going flat or worse, going down. But you'll get some people, like let's say we are at the bottom, and in a month or 2 months or whatever, we're considerably higher. If that's what happens, then you'll get a lot of people looking back fondly at this time when they could buy a load of shares and they made a load of money. But we'll just have to wait and see. Of course, I've just got to stick with the plan of trying to grow our Bitcoin yield, trying to make sure that all of the elements in the business are doing what they're meant to be doing, and we're pushing that business forward for the multi-year plan. But yeah, it is frustrating when you look at it on the short time scales as well, which we all do, as well as focusing on the longer term.
Yeah, and I want to come back to the future sort of later on. Going to ask a few questions that have come up in the chat while we've been talking. Firstly, and this has come up about 3 times from different people. Are you going to keep the ATM going even though we're at or close to a 1x MNAV? No, obviously it wasn't running for a lot of today anyway, because the yesterday's close was 90p, so it's below that. But like, is there a lower limit? Is it 1 MNAV? Is that where the ATM turns off?
Yeah, we haven't actually specified that, and I don't think I am going to specify it either. The only thing that I would say is, there isn't a great deal of point in selling equity below 1 MNAV. The other thing to keep in mind is that the MNAV does change. So the MNAV changes, obviously Bitcoin goes up, Bitcoin goes down. But yeah, I'm incredibly happy with the job that our ATM operator has done to date. And I think that I trust them to place the equity through the ATM style facility in a way that's beneficial to the company. Yeah, so that could be translated in a different way, but yeah, we're going to continue to do all of the things that we believe are beneficial to the business
and the shareholders.
Well, obviously, yeah, because the business is run for the shareholders.
Yeah.
First and foremost in every decision that we make.
And this was a follow-up, but I think you've kind of already answered it. What about the selling equity? Is it 1.1 MNAV? Where's the cutoff for that? So non-ATM equity.
Yeah, so the cutoff for that is ignore any warrants that you may or may not offer, because the thing with the warrants is until you get the money, you don't know whether that's going to be positive in terms of Bitcoin per share. Because in very simple terms, if Bitcoin's 50% higher, i.e. because those warrants the other day are 50% higher when you get the money, it isn't particularly brilliant for the company in terms of Bitcoin per share. But you can argue that you generated some capital that might have allowed you to do something else, which will all become clear in the future, that you might not have been able to do in the same way without it. So that goes to everything interlinking. But yeah, you'd be very unlikely to sell any equity if it didn't increase your Bitcoin yield, and you almost certainly shouldn't do it. So, but you can't look at it in the simple terms of a 1M NAV. You can almost look at it in that way, but it also depends on the commission that you pay. So, say for example, I did a direct subscription with an institution that I know, and we did it all direct with the company without any, settlement happening anywhere else, and with almost non-existent legal fees because we used stuff that we had already done before. You could do that selling the equity at a 1M NAV, but let's say you're paying 4 or 5% commission, for example, on that raise, then you'd have to do that at like a 1.05%, roughly speaking, MNAV, i.e. above a 1 MNAV, the price, because otherwise by the time you get the money and then you've deployed it into Bitcoin, assuming that Bitcoin didn't change in price, didn't go up or didn't go down, then you're still generating just about a positive, so if you look at our quarter to date yield, when our next Bitcoin buy goes out, you'll effectively see whether or not doing the fundraise announced on Monday was beneficial in simple maths terms, i.e. is the quarter to date yield, positive or negative? So that will tell you whether it was worth doing purely from a Bitcoin per share point of view. But then also on top of that, you've got the thing that I said earlier, which is showing the market that we can still raise money when, let's be realistic about it, these other companies can't. And the side benefit of that what that says to other investors who then want to get involved because we're one of the few companies actually doing stuff on that side of things. So yeah, it's mathematical in terms of the benefit for Bitcoin per share, but then it's also subjective in terms of the benefit to the wider business of doing these actions.
And then I kind of want to start looking at the future, rather than necessarily the past or where we're stood right today. But I'm doing that by asking you about something you said in the interview yesterday, or rather that Alexandra said yesterday. So he said about asset managers having both long-term and short-term views, because obviously they're invested for the long term, but they kind of have quarterly reports and things to do to the people they're managing assets for. And I've kind of noticed across not just SWC's community, but all the treasury communities, that there's an extremely heavy focus on where is it today, when's it going up, that kind of thing. So I kind of want to ask you to expand on the sort of short, medium, long-term opportunities for SWC to get people thinking a little bit further ahead than what's happening today, tomorrow, kind of thing.
Well, that's perfectly reasonable, but we can't change human behavior, and the reality is that despite what some people say, most people have got quite short time horizons, and that's okay. So I think the most important thing for a Bitcoin treasury company is to show that they're doing things in the shorter term. That said, and that's obviously what I believe, but if I look at some of the other companies that are trading at a better MNAV than us, they're not actually doing anything. So maybe by slogging our guts out, working all day long, maybe we're doing the wrong thing. Maybe we shouldn't be raising money. Maybe we shouldn't be buying Bitcoin. Maybe we shouldn't be delivering a Bitcoin yield. Maybe we shouldn't be communicating with people, all day, every day. And maybe that's how you build a better company. I don't know. I don't think that's not what I would want for if I was investing in a company. So it's certainly not what we're going to be doing. But at times I do think that maybe that's the answer, clearly it isn't, but if you're trying to build a proper long-term business, which leads us nicely onto, where we're actually heading. And I've been, sort of upfront with people right from the start, right from before the share price started going up. You go back to, the first ever Daily Mail article that they wrote about us, I think before we even IPO'd, that was. And I said that I want us to be a FTSE 100 company. And I believe that in the first 12 months of being listed, that we'll be a FTSE 250 company, which is not a bad start towards getting to the FTSE 100, within a 12-month time period. So, to me, obviously I don't like seeing the share price, when it's like this. My wife has been incredibly supportive, but even she said to me today, I think she was joking, she said, "What are you going to do about the share price? I've looked at my account and it doesn't look very good." And I told her to chill out a bit because, obviously she can see that I'm working, every hour that God sends, sort of to try and grow the business forward. But it's this is a long-term mission for me. I think that we're doing everything right to build a business that we're going to be incredibly proud of in the future. I'm obviously proud about what we've done so far, but it's nothing compared with where I want it to be in quite a short space of time. If you said to me, if I wasn't running this business, because don't forget, that's why I listed the business, because I wanted a business like this and I couldn't find one, so I listed my own business. If you said to me that, you've got somebody like me that's going to put everything into this business for the next couple of years and try and get it considerably higher, then, I would support that. And I'm not saying to people, even though I would like to do this for the next, decade, 2 decades, whatever, as long as everyone wants me to do it, I'm not saying that, you've got to tie your money up for 10 years and then maybe get a return. It's quite a short time period. So yeah, I've got no idea about the next couple of days, but I believe that the next couple of months and the next couple of years will be an incredibly good place for our shareholders, and we'll keep trying our best around that. Clearly there's some link to Bitcoin. Bitcoin's got to do well because Bitcoin is our only treasury asset that we have. So obviously if my personal beliefs on Bitcoin aren't true, then that's not a great thing for the company, because our we've got almost £250 million worth of Bitcoin, so that needs to perform as well. But other than that, it's just us executing our plan, and it should be incredibly good. But we'll obviously have to wait and see.
Yeah, so firstly, you'd like to think that people investing in SWC, are already into Bitcoin, as in believe in Bitcoin. But
yeah, I don't think you could make that assumption. No, I think there's probably a core amount of people, let's say, it might not even be 50% of people that really care about it and really believe in it, and believe in all the same values that I do. But you'll have a lot of other people that, I don't want to alienate anyone here, but it's just a very, very good stock to make a lot of money, and they probably don't care whether we're buying Bitcoin or sort of nuclear bombs. They see it as, which they're right, potentially the very best type of equity in the world. And there's nothing wrong about that. People don't have to be like me and live their life by Bitcoin. They can just see it like a very, very good opportunity, and that's okay. And you will get a lot of that. Most people that buy stocks, will buy stocks because it's somewhere where they can make money, without wanting to sort of shatter the illusion for anyone.
And still focusing on the future, aspirations for LSE uplisting leading to potential FTSE 250 inclusion. What other either aspirations or catalysts do you see in the future, in your opinion?
Yeah, so I would like, a lot of things are linked around that, if we're honest about it, James. because one of the things that I want to see is I want to see more notifiable holdings from institutional investors, which means that they've got more than 3% of the company. Now, until we've got that listing, you're not going to see so much of that. So a lot of things hang around that. FTSE 250 inclusion, you're not going to see that until you've got an LSE listing, for example. We're doing okay at the moment in terms of getting some of the media comments, about the company. I've been quite pleased with that, and I think that there'll be more of those. But again, you'll see more of those when you've got that side of things happening. I was incredibly disappointed yesterday to see my former employer's comments about Bitcoin. I thought that was absolutely disgusting, appalling, and just so wrong to see them put out a statement to say that Bitcoin's got no value. I still can't even believe it, saying it, like yes, make some sort of an excuse up or say things, but such a hard line. And I was talking yesterday to the FT journalist that wrote the article about it today, and I just couldn't believe it, and that made me a bit sad, because we're doing all of these things to push things forward, and then there's still some things that haven't quite changed. I read a lot of the articles, funnily enough, about the London Stock Exchange, and the usual thing about it's tough, but maybe there's going to be a listing, and I want to see more about us in those articles, and I think we're slowly getting there, like changing the perception of, people can talk about us like we are a success story out of the UK. So I'd like to see a bit more of that come out, but you've just got to keep pushing on with those things, and then you win eventually, and that's why, being an entrepreneur is quite a good thing, because you've got the resilience, and you just keep going. But yeah, a lot of the things that will be catalysts or milestones and things, they're all quite interlinked.
Yeah, and I can't remember what the stat was that someone put on X about how much SWC have raised versus all the IPOs.
Yeah, it's been great. We've raised a lot of money. We've done a lot of good for the capital markets in the UK. We've done a lot of good for Bitcoin in the UK. I'd quite like to be accepted more by the UK Bitcoin community. I think that they've been pretty poor to us in terms of acceptance. When we've done a lot of good for that, the international Bitcoin community has been incredibly welcoming to us. So I'd quite like to see that alongside what we're doing. Maybe even get invited on some of their podcasts. And just to make it very, very clear, I won't be paying for any of these podcasts. If that's what you're going to ask me for. But I'd quite like to go on some of those things and get the word out there a little bit more about what we're doing. That would be a good milestone for me, to be a bit more accepted into the UK Bitcoin community.
Yeah, maybe some olive branches can be exchanged, and that can happen.
It would certainly be nice,
Okay, I think that's kind of us done for today, unless there's anything that you would particularly like to share that I haven't brought up.
No, I think obviously it's been pretty tough, like for everyone, with the share price. Obviously some people have sort of been buying, other people have been selling. That's what makes a market. I think we all need to, make our own decisions on what we think the future holds for Bitcoin. I'm incredibly bullish about it. See where we go from there. I couldn't be happier with what we're doing in the company itself. The whole team have been working so hard on that. I couldn't be prouder of them all. And we've got a really good team that, we've been piecing together, in quite a short space of time. It's not even quite 6 months of being a listed business. And then, believe me when I say that, when I can announce some of the things that I really desperately want to announce, I will. And then hopefully, a bit like with the deal that I announced the other day, you'll see that, a lot of the things that we've been doing behind the scenes, are really quite beneficial, when you see them all pieced together. And, obviously, as always, if people have got questions or comments, they can, reach out to us, stick something on Twitter, Jesse or myself or one of the other guys will pick it up and or send us an email, give us a call. The telephone numbers on the website, we appreciate the support.
I just thought of one last question. How's the recruitment going at the moment?
Yes, so we've got one role which we have not found a right person for yet. We've got another role that I haven't spoken to Alex for about 24 hours about, and we found one person that looked quite good. I've been speaking to Alex quite a lot on how we're tackling our new web project, you see. So what we're doing is and I haven't got any timescales for this at the moment, but we're building a new website, which is, our operating business website and our investor relations website, but putting them together, which is slightly harder than you would think, because you've got to make sure that it's clear and it works for all of those different audiences, but we think we've got a good way of doing it. And there's a lot of work that goes into the creative side of that, because we're using it as an opportunity to do a rebranding exercise, still with the same name, same logo, same colors, broadly speaking, but to work out the imagery and the animation that goes into that alongside that. So we're trying to see whether we can find this other person that Alex is looking for to help us with that as well, to give us another perspective on that. But equally, we need to push ahead with that project as well, because there's a time that I want that out there. But yeah, the recruitment side of things is going quite well. But we've also got quite a good team, so there's not that many gaps at the moment, and we need to give the team a little bit of time to sort of all sort of grow together, because otherwise, if when you're fast moving and you're constantly adding people, it sort of, that's quite a challenge as well. So we're just trying to get all of those things right, really, as best we can, and so far so good.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much, Andrew. As always, I've thoroughly enjoyed talking to you, and I hope everyone who's watched this or watches it on catch up later finds it useful. Just a short public service announcement to the people watching this. Please, can you like and share, particularly on X, if you share it with a quote, and so you actually write something at the top, that kind of gives the best impact. It's not about me. This is about getting SWC out there. So do it for all the videos, no matter who's produced them. And, keep up the good fight, everyone. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.